Donald Trump's civil trial continues in New York. His daughter, Ivanka Trump, has now taken the stand in the case. Her father is accused of inflating his net worth in order to get loans and insurance. Ivanka telling the court that while she recalls a 2011 business meeting regarding plans to develop a post office into a hotel, she did not recall specific discussions about her father's finances in that particular meeting. The judge has already ruled in this case that Trump committed fraud, and the focus now then for the judge is deciding on some other charges: conspiracy, insurance fraud, falsifying business records, as well as making a ruling on damages. Here now, attorney David Weinstein, partner with Jones Walker and a former federal prosecutor. Good to see you. So did Ivanka's testimony do anything to alter the trajectory of this case so far? What stood out to you?
Well, I don't think it set it off course necessarily. I don't think it added enough for the defense to win on their directed verdict motion that's going to be coming up. I think in some ways it did help both sides. What stood out for me is, as she continually said, I can't recall, that gave the Attorney General's people the opportunity to put emails in front of her and say, well, this might refresh your recollection. Do you remember this exchange where you specifically talked about net worth and the financial statements and how involved you were with certain projects? So that didn't really help the cause. On the other hand, her continued statements along the same line as her brothers, that they relied on other people to put together these financial statements and that the loans, in fact, did go through and the projects were successful, then in some small way helps the defense case. So again, not pushing it off course, but I don't think it particularly helped the defense.
One of the moments, David, that got some attention, at least caught mine, was one of the Trump lawyers making note of several of the state attorneys who were laughing during Ivanka's testimony. Is this just par for the course of what has been a trial that has seemed a bit out of control at times?
I think it is par for the course, Marni. I mean, look, this is a judge who's deciding this case. This is not a jury. I think it would have a different impact if there were jurors who were considering the case. And that's why it's always important for every lawyer on both sides to restrain themselves, because jurors look at us all the time, what we wear, how we react, whether we're smirking, what our reactions are. And they subconsciously use those, and sometimes consciously use those moments against either side. But in this case, I think it's just emblematic of how out of control this case has been at moments, and the fact that it's really not going to make an impact on this judge, but it's certainly going to make an impact on the court of public opinion.
So right now, the defense is getting ready to present its case. What are you expecting their strategy will be?
I think their strategy is going to be along the lines of some of the questions they were asking on cross-examination, some of the statements they've been making in argument to the judge, and that is, no one really relied on these financial statements. So these statements themselves, while the Attorney General is claiming were fraudulent and over-evaluated and overinflated values, the banks didn't really rely on them. And if they didn't rely on them, then how in the world did the defendants commit any fraud? And then they'll go back to the facts that there were these disclaimers in these statements, that the defendants were relying on experts, whether they were accountants, whether they were other evaluators or lawyers who put these together, and that caused them to not necessarily be in compliance, but it's not something that you should hold against the defendants here. But the problem is, Marni, the judge has already ruled on one big component of this, that there was fraud. As you mentioned earlier, there are several other counts for the judge still to consider. And then ultimately, how much disgorgement are they going to get out of the Trump organizations? And quite frankly, most importantly, will this judge allow the Trump organization and the Trumps to continue to do business in New York State, which is at the heart of their business plan? So I think it's a tough road ahead for the defense here. And this will only be over at the trial court level. This has still got to go up to the Court of Appeals, where there's a number of issues pending already. And we may not have a final decision until well into 2024 or beyond.
Right. I mean, this is far, far from over, but you get at the heart of it, right? Because so many of the questions that people are still asking is, what was the crime? The banks were paid back. Who are the victims? So it's more about the money made in what transpired.
It is a lot about the money made and what transpired. And look, that argument is fine based on what happened, but they'd be in a completely different position if the banks were affected by these loans, if the projects weren't successful, if the money didn't get paid back. These banks would be screaming and yelling about the fact that these misrepresentations were made, and the attorney general wouldn't be the only one. The banks would be the first ones to run to court and say, look, these people deceived us. We only gave these loans because of what they said the net worth was. And so we were injured in this. They got lucky. These projects succeeded and the economy was doing well for them. But had this been the other way around, there'd be a lot more people screaming and yelling.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.